I called my son Marcus on December 10th to confirm our Christmas dinner plans. His response changed everything between us forever. "Mom, I wasn't really expecting you to come this year. We're keeping it small, just immediate family." The silence that followed felt like ice water floating my veins. After 32 years of being his mother, apparently I wasn't immediate family anymore. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The phone felt heavy in my hand as I stared at the December snow falling outside my Milwaukee apartment window. Marcus had just informed me that Christmas dinner at his house would be too crowded with me there. His wife Chelsea had apparently decided that her parents deserved the spare bedroom more than I did, and having 3 generations under one roof would be too stressful for the kids. I sat down slowly at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd wrapped countless Christmas presents for Marcus over the years, the same table where I'd helped him with homework until midnight, where I'd listened to his teenage heartbreaks, where I'd planned surprise parties for every birthday milestone. Now, at 63, I was being uninvited from Christmas because my presence was inconvenient. The conversation replayed in my mind like a broken record. I'd called with such excitement, ready to discuss what dishes I should bring, whether I should arrive Christmas Eve or Christmas morning, how long I could stay to help with cleanup. Instead, Marcus had delivered his verdict with the casual indifference of someone declining a dinner invitation from an acquaintance. "It's nothing personal, Mom," he'd said when I'd asked for clarification. "Chelsea's parents are flying in from Phoenix, and you know how Grandma Patricia gets when there are too many people around. Plus, little Emma is going through a phase where she gets overwhelmed easily." Emma was my granddaughter, 7 years old, with my same green eyes and stubborn chin. The child I'd babysat every weekend for the first 4 years of her life while Marcus and Chelsea built their careers. The little girl who used to run to me shouting "Nana Rose" whenever I walked through their front door. Now, apparently, my presence would overwhelm her. I'd raised Marcus alone after his father walked out when Marcus was 3. 29 years of single motherhood, working double shifts as a nurse at Milwaukee General Hospital to pay for everything from Little League fees to college tuition. I'd missed countless social events, postponed vacations, and put my own dreams on hold to ensure Marcus had every opportunity to succeed. And he had succeeded. At 32, he owned a beautiful 4-bedroom house in Wauwatosa, drove a luxury SUV, and worked as a financial advisor for a prestigious firm downtown. His wife Chelsea was a marketing executive with her own impressive salary. They lived the comfortable suburban life I'd sacrificed everything to make possible for him. The irony wasn't lost on me that their financial success was built on a foundation I'd provided, not just through college tuition and living expenses, but through something much more significant, something Marcus seemed to have forgotten entirely. 5 years ago, when Marcus and Chelsea were newlyweds struggling to qualify for their dream house, they'd come to me with desperate eyes and detailed spreadsheets. The mortgage they wanted was just beyond their reach. They needed a co-signer, someone with established credit and steady income to guarantee their loan. "Mom, you'd be helping us start our family properly," Marcus had pleaded over dinner at their favorite restaurant. "This house has everything we want. 4 bedrooms, a big yard for kids, good schools nearby. We just need someone to vouch for us with the bank." I'd signed those papers without hesitation. My signature on the mortgage documents made their suburban dream possible. My credit score, built over decades of careful financial management, had secured their loan. My promise to the bank meant they could afford the house where they now live so comfortably, the house where I was no longer welcome for Christmas. I pulled out my copy of the mortgage documents from the filing cabinet in my bedroom. The papers were pristine, organized in a folder labeled Marcus House Loan. I'd kept meticulous records, just as I'd taught him to do with important financial documents. There it was, clear as daylight, my signature as co-signer, accepting full financial responsibility if Marcus and Chelsea defaulted. The bank had my contact information as the primary backup. Every monthly payment went through my account first, then transferred to theirs, a system we'd established to ensure the mortgage was never late. I'd been making this arrangement work flawlessly for 5 years, never missed a transfer, never questioned their spending, never used my position as leverage in family disagreements. I'd been the silent financial partner in their success, asking for nothing in return except to remain part of their lives. But now, their lives apparently didn't have room for me. The December wind rattled my apartment windows as I sat alone with the mortgage documents spread across my kitchen table. The same wind was probably shaking the windows of Marcus's warm, spacious house, the house I'd made possible for him. I wondered if he ever thought about that when he looked around his comfortable living room or watched Emma play in her large backyard. Probably not. I'd been so careful over the years never to remind Marcus of my financial role in his homeownership. I'd never wanted him to feel indebted or obligated. When Chelsea redecorated their entire main floor last year, spending thousands on new furniture and fixtures, I'd admired their choices without mentioning that my co-signature was what made their home equity line of credit possible. When they'd taken that expensive vacation to Europe last summer, posting photos from Paris and Rome while I worked extra shifts to cover my own modest expenses, I'd liked every social media post without pointing out that their mortgage stability freed up income for such luxuries. When Marcus bought his boat last spring, a sleek fishing vessel he'd been wanting for years, I'd listened to his excited phone calls about weekend lake trips without reminding him that my financial backing was what allowed him to take on additional recreational loans. I'd been the invisible foundation of their financial security, and I'd been proud to play that role. Until today, when I learned that my importance to their family had been equally invisible. The phone rang, interrupting my brooding. I glanced at the caller ID, hoping maybe Marcus had reconsidered, that he'd realized how hurtful his dismissal had been. Instead, it was my sister Linda calling from Oregon. "Rose, how are the Christmas plans coming along?" Linda's voice was cheerful, full of the excitement that December always brought to our family. "Are you driving to Marcus's place on Christmas Eve or Christmas morning?" I found myself explaining the situation, trying to keep my voice steady as I repeated Marcus's reasoning. Linda's silence grew longer as I spoke, and when I finished, her response was sharp and immediate. He said, "What? Rose, that's absolutely unacceptable. You've been going to Christmas dinner there for the past 5 years. It's tradition." "Chelsea's parents are visiting," I said, hearing how weak the excuse sounded even as I repeated it. "So, they have a 4-bedroom house. They can make it work if they want to. This is about something else, Rose. This is about them taking you for granted." Linda's words stung because they rang true. Over the past few years, I'd noticed subtle changes in how Marcus and Chelsea treated me. The invitations that came later and with less enthusiasm. The family decisions made without consulting me. The gradual shift from feeling like an integral part of their lives to feeling like an occasional guest who needed to be accommodated. I'd attributed it to natural life changes. Young families get busy. Careers become demanding.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Priority shift. I told myself that my role as the central figure in Marcus's life was naturally diminishing as his own family took precedence. But Linda was right. This felt like something more deliberate. This felt like being systematically excluded from the family I'd helped create and support. After hanging up with Linda, I sat in my quiet apartment as darkness fell outside. The December evening was cold and still, matching the chill I felt inside. I looked around at my modest but comfortable space, furnished with pieces I'd collected carefully over the years. Nothing expensive or flashy, but everything chosen with thought and care. This was the life I'd built for myself after dedicating decades to building a life for Marcus. At 63, I was finally at a stage where I could focus on my own needs and desires. My nursing career was winding down toward a comfortable retirement. I had savings, a decent pension plan, and the freedom to make choices based on what I wanted rather than what Marcus needed. But I'd assumed those choices would still include being part of Marcus's family. I'd assumed that after 32 years of being his mother, I'd earned a permanent place at his table. Apparently, I'd assumed wrong. I made myself a simple dinner and tried to focus on other things. I had friends who would welcome me for Christmas. Linda had already extended an invitation to join her family in Portland. My neighbor Mrs. Chen had mentioned that her daughter's family always made room for extra guests during their Christmas celebration. But none of those alternatives addressed the deeper issue. Marcus had made a choice about my value to his family, and that choice revealed something I'd been trying not to see for months. I was being managed rather than included, tolerated rather than welcomed. My presence had become something to be scheduled around rather than celebrated. The realization felt like discovering that a relationship I'd treasured was one-sided. All those years I'd thought we were building something together, Marcus had apparently been preparing for a life that didn't center around me. The phone rang again around 9 o'clock. This time it was Marcus, and I could hear the guilt in his voice before he even finished saying hello. "Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation earlier. I know the Christmas thing was kind of sudden." "Kind of sudden," I repeated, testing the words. "Marcus, I've been planning to spend Christmas with you and your family for months." "I know, and I'm sorry about the timing. It's just that Chelsea's been really stressed about having everyone comfortable, and her parents specifically asked about sleeping arrangements, and..." He continued explaining, but I found myself only half listening. The excuses felt rehearsed, like he'd practiced this conversation with Chelsea before calling me. None of his words addressed the fundamental issue, which was that when forced to choose between my comfort and his in-laws' convenience, he'd chosen his in-laws without hesitation. "Marcus," I interrupted gently, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you remember who co-signed your mortgage?" The silence that followed was different from his earlier pauses. This wasn't him searching for better words or trying to soften difficult news. This was the silence of someone who just realized they'd made a significant miscalculation. "Mom, that's completely different. That's business." "Is it?" "Because from my perspective, my willingness to guarantee your mortgage was about family. It was about helping my son achieve his dreams. And I appreciate that, I really do. But that doesn't mean we can't make practical decisions about holidays." Practical decisions. That phrase crystallized everything I'd been feeling but couldn't articulate. My inclusion in his family had become a practical decision rather than an emotional priority. "You're right," I said quietly. "We should all make practical decisions." "So, you understand about Christmas?" "I understand perfectly." After hanging up, I sat in my living room staring at the small Christmas tree I'd already decorated for the holiday that I would apparently be spending alone. The lights twinkled cheerfully, oblivious to the shift that had just occurred in my understanding of my own life. Marcus had made practical decisions about our relationship. Now it was time for me to do the same. I spent the rest of that evening researching co-signer rights and mortgage responsibilities. The internet was full of information about people in similar situations similar to mine, and most of the advice was consistent. As a co-signer, I had significant rights and responsibilities that many people didn't fully understand. The most important thing I learned was that my relationship to Marcus's mortgage wasn't just a one-time favor I'd done years ago. It was an ongoing financial commitment that could be modified or terminated under specific circumstances. As I read through various financial advice websites and legal forums, I began to understand that my signature on Marcus's mortgage documents gave me considerable leverage in our relationship. Leverage I'd never considered using because I'd never imagined needing to protect my own interests from my son's practical decisions. But practical decisions, I was learning, could work both ways. The next morning, I called my financial advisor, Janet Mitchell, and asked to schedule an emergency meeting. Janet had been helping me manage my money for over a decade, and she'd been involved in the original discussions about co-signing Marcus's mortgage. "Rose, what's going on? You sound upset." I explained the Christmas situation and my growing realization that my relationship with Marcus had shifted into something I didn't recognize. Janet listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of understanding or concern. "I need to understand my options regarding the mortgage," I said. "I co-signed that loan with certain expectations about my role in Marcus's life. Those expectations are no longer being met." Janet was quiet for a moment. "Rose, are you sure you want to go down this road? Family and finances can get very complicated very quickly." They already are complicated. The difference is that now I'm aware of it. We scheduled a meeting for the following day, and I spent the rest of December 11th thinking about the conversation I would need to have with Marcus. Not the emotional conversation about hurt feelings and Christmas disappointment, but the practical conversation about financial responsibilities and adult relationships. If Marcus wanted to make practical decisions about our relationship, then we would make practical decisions. That evening, I called him back. Marcus, I've been thinking about what you said, about making practical decisions. Good, Mom. I knew you'd understand. I do understand.
And I've decided to make some practical decisions of my own. What do you mean? I took a deep breath, feeling steadier than I'd felt in days. I mean that I'm going to reconsider my role as co-signer on your mortgage. If I'm not immediate family for Christmas purposes, then perhaps I shouldn't be taking on immediate family financial responsibilities either. The silence that followed was profound. I could almost hear Marcus's mind racing, calculating the implications of what I just said. Mom, you can't be serious. I'm being completely practical, just like you were about Christmas. I'm 63 years old, Marcus. I need to make decisions based on what's best for my financial future, not what's most convenient for other people. But the mortgage, we can't just change that overnight. Actually, we can. I've been researching my options as a co-signer. There are several ways to modify or terminate my involvement, especially if the original circumstances of the agreement have changed. Marcus's voice became strained. What original circumstances? The circumstances where I was considered part of your immediate family, where my involvement in your life was welcomed rather than managed, where my financial support was part of a relationship based on mutual respect and inclusion. I could hear Chelsea talking in the background, her voice urgent and concerned. Marcus covered the phone partially, and I caught fragments of their hurried conversation. Words like serious and can't and Christmas floated through the static. Mom, let's not do anything hasty. Maybe we can work something out about Christmas. This isn't about Christmas anymore, Marcus. This is about me learning to make practical decisions about my own life. What exactly are you planning to do? I'm meeting with my financial advisor tomorrow to discuss my options. Then I'll be in touch with my attorney to understand the legal implications. After that, we'll see what makes the most practical sense for everyone involved. The conversation ended shortly after that, with Marcus promising to call me back the next day after he'd had time to think. I noticed he didn't promise to reconsider the Christmas situation, just to think about my response to it. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. For the first time since Marcus's dismissive phone call, I felt like I had some control over my own situation. I wasn't just reacting to his decisions anymore. I was making decisions of my own. The next morning, my meeting with Janet was illuminating and empowering in ways I hadn't expected. She spread my financial records across her desk and walked me through exactly what my co-signer status meant in practical terms. Rose, your signature on this mortgage means the bank considers you equally responsible for this debt. If Marcus and Chelsea default, you're not just a backup option, you're fully liable for the entire remaining balance. She showed me the current mortgage balance, which was still substantial despite 5 years of payments. She also showed me the estimated value of Marcus's house, which had appreciated significantly since he'd purchased it. The good news is that the property value has grown enough that they have considerable equity. If they needed to sell or refinance, they'd likely be able to eliminate your cosigner requirement entirely. What if they don't want to do that? Janet leaned back in her chair, studying me with the careful expression she used when discussing major financial decisions. Then you have some interesting options. As cosigner, you have the right to receive copies of all mortgage statements and payment records. You can request to be notified of any changes to the loan terms. And in certain circumstances, you can trigger a review of the cosigner arrangement. She pulled out another folder and showed me documents I'd never seen before. Most importantly, Rose, you have the right to remove yourself as cosigner under specific conditions. If the original borrower's financial situation has improved substantially since the loan was initiated, the bank can be petitioned to release cosigners from their obligations. I looked at the numbers Janet had compiled. Marcus and Chelsea's combined income had increased by over 60% since they'd first applied for the mortgage. Their credit scores had improved. They'd established 5 years of perfect payment history. They could qualify for this mortgage on their own now, Janet said. They probably could have qualified on their own for the past 2 years. Then why haven't they removed me as co-signer? Janet's smile was knowing and slightly sad. Because it's convenient to have you there. Your co-signature gives them better interest rates, more favorable terms, and additional borrowing capacity. From a practical standpoint, there's no reason for them to change anything. Except that I might want to change it. Exactly. We spent the next hour discussing my options in detail. I could request immediate removal as co-signer, which would force Marcus and Chelsea to refinance at current market rates. I could demand to be added to the property title as compensation for my ongoing financial liability. I could require them to secure additional insurance to protect my interests. Or I could give them an ultimatum. Refinance to remove my involvement entirely, or accept that my role as co-signer came with expectations about my treatment as a family member. What would you do, Janet? She was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Rose, I've known you for 10 years. You've always put Marcus's interests ahead of your own financial security. You've been generous to a fault, and that generosity has been taken for granted. She gathered up the papers and looked at me directly. I think it's time Marcus learned that your financial support comes with the expectation of basic respect. Not manipulation or gratitude, just respect. If he can't provide that, then he doesn't deserve the financial advantages you've been giving him. I left Janet's office with a clear understanding of my position and a specific plan for moving forward. I also left with something I hadn't felt in years, confidence that I deserved better treatment than I'd been accepting. That afternoon, I called my attorney, David Kowalski, who had handled my will and other legal matters for several years. David listened to my situation with the same careful attention Janet had shown, asking questions that helped clarify the emotional and financial aspects of my dilemma. Rose, what outcome are you hoping to achieve? Do you want to punish Marcus, or do you want to change the dynamic of your relationship? I want to change the dynamic. I want him to understand that I'm not someone who can be managed and dismissed when it's convenient. And if he doesn't understand that, if he chooses to maintain his current approach to your relationship? I thought about that question seriously. Then, I want to protect myself financially and emotionally from further damage. David nodded approvingly. That's a healthy perspective. Let's talk about how to structure this conversation to maximize the chances of a positive outcome while protecting your interests if the outcome isn't what you hope for. We spent an hour crafting a strategy that would give Marcus a clear choice about the future of our relationship. Not an emotional ultimatum based on hurt feelings, but a practical decision based on mutual respect and fair treatment. David would draft a formal letter outlining my position and my expectations. The letter would give Marcus 30 days to make a decision about refinancing the mortgage to remove my co-signer status. If he chose to keep me as co-signer, the letter would outline specific expectations about my role in family decisions and events. This puts the choice entirely in his hands, David explained. He can't claim he didn't understand the consequences of his actions, and he can't blame you for whatever outcome he chooses. That evening, I called Linda to update her on my plans. Her response was immediate and supportive. Rose, I'm so proud of you. You've been letting that boy take advantage of your generosity for years. It's time he learned that being a good mother doesn't mean being a doormat. I just hope this leads to a better relationship, not no relationship. Honey, if standing up for yourself destroys your relationship with Marcus, then it wasn't a relationship worth preserving. Real love can handle honest communication about expectations and boundaries. Linda's words stayed with me as I prepared for what might be the most important conversation I'd ever had with my son. Not because of the financial implications, but because it would determine whether Marcus was capable of treating me as an adult who deserved respect rather than a resource to be managed. The next morning, December 13th, I called Marcus and asked him to meet me for coffee that afternoon. I could hear the tension in his voice when he agreed, probably anticipating another emotional conversation about Christmas plans. Instead, he was going to get something entirely different. He was going to get a practical discussion about adult relationships and financial responsibilities. As I drove to the coffee shop where we'd agreed to meet, I felt calmer than I'd felt in days. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt anymore. I was simply clear about what I deserved and what I was willing to accept. Marcus was already seated when I arrived, looking uncomfortable and checking his phone frequently. He stood to hug me when I approached the table, but the gesture felt obligatory rather than warm. "Mom, I hope we can work this whole thing out. Chelsea and I have been talking, and we think maybe there's a solution that works for everyone." I sat down across from him, noting that he'd started the conversation by mentioning Chelsea's involvement in whatever solution they'd devised. Even now, addressing problems with his mother was apparently a team effort that required his wife's input. "I'm glad you've been thinking about solutions, Marcus. I've been doing the same thing." I pulled out a folder containing copies of the documents Janet and David had prepared for me. Marcus's eyes widened slightly when he saw the official paperwork, but he maintained his composed expression. "These are documents outlining my rights and responsibility as co-signer on your mortgage," I said calmly. "I thought it might be helpful for both of us to understand exactly what my financial involvement in your homeownership entails." Marcus opened the folder and began reading. I watched his face change as he processed the information, moving from confusion to concern to what looked like genuine surprise. "I didn't realize you had all these rights as co-signer." "Neither did I until I started researching. It turns out that my signature on your mortgage documents creates an ongoing relationship between us that involves much more than I originally understood." I pulled out another document, the letter David had drafted outlining my position. "This explains my concerns about the current dynamic of our relationship and my expectations going forward." Marcus read in silence for several minutes. I could see him processing not just the words on the page, but the implications of what I was presenting to him. "Mom, this is really formal. Are you sure we need lawyers and legal documents to work out a family disagreement about Christmas dinner?" "Marcus, this isn't about Christmas dinner. This is about me recognizing that I've been allowing myself to be treated in ways that I wouldn't accept from anyone else in my life." I leaned forward, keeping my voice calm but firm. "For 5 years, I've been financially responsible for your mortgage without asking for anything in return except to remain part of your family. But over the past few months, and especially over the past few days, I've realized that my financial contributions aren't translating into respectful treatment." Marcus looked uncomfortable, shifting in his chair and glancing around the coffee shop as if looking for support or escape. "That's not fair, Mom. We appreciate everything you've done for us." "Appreciation and respect are different things, Marcus. Appreciation is a feeling. Respect is a behavior." I pointed to the letter he'd been reading. "This document gives you a choice. You can refinance your mortgage to remove me as co-signer, which would eliminate my financial responsibility and your obligation to consider my feelings in family decisions. Or you can keep me as co-signer with the understanding that my ongoing financial support comes with expectations about how I'm treated as a family member." Marcus was quiet for a long time, rereading sections of the letter and occasionally looking up at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "What kind of expectations?" "The expectation that major family decisions will be discussed with me before they're finalized. The expectation that I'll be included in family gatherings unless there are genuine logistical problems that can't be solved. The expectation that when conflicts arise, we'll address them directly rather than through exclusion or dismissal." I could see Marcus's mind working, probably calculating the financial implications of refinancing versus accepting my expectations about family inclusion. "This feels like you're holding the mortgage hostage to get your way about Christmas." His words stung, but I'd expected this accusation.
David had warned me that Marcus might try to reframe my position as manipulation rather than acknowledging the manipulation I'd been experiencing. Marcus, I'm not holding anything hostage. I'm offering you a choice about the kind of relationship we have going forward. If you prefer a relationship where your financial independence matters more than family inclusion, then refinancing is the perfect solution for both of us. But refinancing would cost us thousands of dollars in fees and higher interest rates. That's the cost of financial independence. If those costs are too high, then perhaps maintaining our current arrangement requires better communication and mutual consideration. Marcus folded the letter and put it back in the folder, his expression showing a mixture of frustration and calculation that I found deeply revealing. I need to discuss this with Chelsea. Of course you do. Take all the time you need. The letter gives you 30 days to make a decision. I stood to leave, noting that Marcus remained seated, still staring at the folder of documents. Mom, wait. What if we worked something out about Christmas? What if we made room for you somehow? I looked down at my son, this man I'd raised and supported and enabled for 32 years, and realized that he still didn't understand the fundamental issue. Marcus, Christmas was never the real problem. Christmas was just when I finally recognized it.
I left him sitting in the coffee shop, surrounded by the legal documents that spelled out exactly how much power I'd been giving him without realizing it, and exactly how much respect I'd been accepting without demanding better. As I drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the satisfaction of standing up for myself without anger, manipulation, or emotional drama. Just clear communication about expectations and consequences. For the first time since this whole situation began, I was looking forward to seeing what Marcus would choose. 3 days passed without a word from Marcus. I knew he was wrestling with the decision, probably having long discussions with Chelsea about their options, maybe even consulting their own financial advisor or attorney. The silence didn't surprise me, but it did give me time to prepare for whatever response they might choose. On December 16th, my phone rang at 7 in the morning. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and I could tell from his tone immediately that the conversation hadn't gone the way he'd hoped. "Mom, we've been thinking about your letter, and we want to discuss some alternatives." "I'm listening." "What if we invited you for Christmas Eve instead of Christmas Day? That way you'd still be part of the celebration, but Chelsea's parents would have Christmas morning with the kids." I sat down at my kitchen table, looking out at the fresh snow that had fallen overnight. His solution addressed none of the fundamental issues I'd raised, focusing instead on the surface problem of holiday scheduling. "Marcus, did you read the entire letter my attorney prepared?" "Yes, but Mom, some of that legal language seems pretty extreme for a family disagreement." "Which part seemed extreme to you?" There was a pause, and I could hear Chelsea talking in the background. Her voice was urgent, coaching him through responses she'd probably helped him rehearse. "The part about adding you to the property title, that's our house, Mom. We've been making the payments." "With my guarantee making those payments possible." "But you're not actually paying the mortgage. We are." I felt a familiar frustration rising, the same feeling I'd experienced countless times over the years when Marcus would minimize my contributions while maximizing his own efforts. "Marcus, let me ask you a question. What would happen to your mortgage if I withdrew my co-signature today?" "You can't just withdraw it. That's not how mortgages work." "Actually, it is how they work under certain circumstances. I've been doing research, and I've learned quite a bit about co-signer rights that I didn't understand when I originally signed your loan documents." The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Marcus alternating between minimizing my role in his financial security and offering small concessions about holiday planning. It became increasingly clear that he viewed my letter as an opening negotiation rather than a serious ultimatum. "Look, Mom, we appreciate everything you've done for us, and we want to find a compromise that works for everyone." "I'm not interested in compromise anymore, Marcus. I'm interested in respect." "But asking to be added to our property title, that's not respect. That's ownership." "You're right. It is ownership. Specifically, it's ownership commensurate with financial responsibility." I could hear Chelsea's voice becoming more animated in the background, and Marcus covered the phone partially while they had a heated discussion. When he returned to our conversation, his tone had shifted to something harder, more defensive. "Mom, Chelsea thinks you're trying to manipulate us into giving you your way about Christmas." "What do you think, Marcus?" "I think you're upset about the holiday situation, and you're using the mortgage as leverage to force us to include you." His words crystallized something I'd been feeling but hadn't articulated. Marcus had learned to see my needs and feelings as manipulation attempts rather than legitimate concerns. Anytime I expressed dissatisfaction with how I was being treated, he reframed it as me being unreasonable or demanding. "Let me be very clear about something," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the anger I felt building. "I am not using the mortgage as leverage. I am recognizing that my financial contributions to your life should correspond with respectful treatment. If you don't want the financial relationship, we can end it. If you want to keep it, then you need to acknowledge what it means. What it means is that you helped us get a loan 5 years ago. What it means is that I am currently guaranteeing your loan every single month. My credit, my financial responsibility, my liability if you default." Marcus was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear him processing this distinction for the first time. "We've never missed a payment. That's not the point. The point is that my ongoing financial support creates an ongoing relationship between us, a relationship that requires mutual respect and consideration." The conversation ended with Marcus saying he needed more time to think, which I interpreted as needing more time to find a way around my ultimatum rather than seriously considering the choice I'd offered him. That afternoon, Chelsea called me directly, which surprised me since she rarely initiated contact without Marcus present. "Rose, I think there's been some misunderstanding about our Christmas plans." Her tone was conciliatory, but calculated, the voice she probably used with difficult clients in her marketing job. "I don't think there's been any misunderstanding, Chelsea. It's just that this year is particularly complicated with my parents visiting, and Emma has been having some behavioral issues lately. We thought it might be easier to keep things simple." I listened to her explanation, noting how she presented their decision as consideration for everyone involved rather than exclusion of me specifically. "Chelsea, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "In the 5 years since you've been married to my son, have I ever been difficult during family gatherings? Have I ever caused problems or made unreasonable demands?" She was quiet for a moment, probably recognizing the trap in my question. "No, you've always been very considerate." "Then why would my presence at Christmas dinner be a problem this year?" "It's not that your presence would be a problem, exactly. It's more about managing everyone's expectations and making sure there's enough space for everyone to be comfortable. Your house has 4 bedrooms and over 3,000 square feet. How much space do you need to be comfortable?" Chelsea's pause was longer this time, and when she spoke again, her tone had shifted from conciliatory to defensive. "Rose, I feel like you're making this much more complicated than it needs to be. We're just trying to plan a nice holiday for our family." "Am I not part of your family?" "Of course you are, but I'm the part that can be excluded when it's convenient?" The conversation deteriorated from there, with Chelsea becoming increasingly frustrated as I refused to accept her explanations. By the end of the call, she'd abandoned the pretense of wanting to include me and had moved to justifying why my exclusion was reasonable. "Rose, I think you need to understand that Marcus and I have our own family now. We can't always prioritize your needs over what's best for our immediate household."
There it was again. The distinction between immediate family and extended family that Marcus had used when he'd first disinvited me from Christmas. The same distinction that apparently didn't apply when they needed my financial support. "You're absolutely right, Chelsea. You should prioritize your immediate household, just as I should prioritize my immediate financial security." After hanging up with Chelsea, I called David Kowalski to update him on my conversations with Marcus and his wife. "It sounds like they're not taking your letter seriously," David observed. "They seem to think they can negotiate their way out of the choice you've offered them." "That's exactly what they think. Marcus called it extreme, and Chelsea thinks I'm overcomplicating things." "Rose, in my experience, people who describe clear boundaries as extreme or complicated are usually people who benefit from the absence of boundaries."
David's words resonated with something I'd been thinking about since my conversation with Chelsea. For years, I'd prided myself on being low maintenance, easygoing, and accommodating. I thought those qualities made me a better mother and mother-in-law. But what if those qualities had actually enabled Marcus and Chelsea to take advantage of my generosity while avoiding any reciprocal consideration for my needs? David, what happens if they simply ignore the 30-day deadline? Then you follow through on the consequences you've outlined. You petition the bank to remove you as cosigner, which forces them to refinance or face default proceedings. And if they can't refinance, then they have to sell the house or find another cosigner. Rose, you need to be prepared for the possibility that calling their bluff might damage your relationship permanently. I spent the next few days thinking about David's warning. Was I prepared to risk my relationship with Marcus over what might appear to outsiders as a petty disagreement about Christmas dinner? But the more I reflected on the situation, the more I realized that the relationship I was risking wasn't the relationship I wanted to preserve anyway. The relationship where I was taken for granted, managed rather than included, and expected to provide financial support while accepting emotional dismissal wasn't worth protecting. David, what happens if they simply ignore the 30-day deadline? Then you follow through on the consequences you've outlined. You petition the bank to remove you as cosigner, which forces them to refinance or face default proceedings. And if they can't refinance, then they have to sell the house or find another cosigner. Rose, you need to be prepared for the possibility that calling their bluff might damage your relationship permanently. I spent the next few days thinking about David's warning. Was I prepared to risk my relationship with Marcus over what might appear to outsiders as a petty disagreement about Christmas dinner? But the more I reflected on the situation, the more I realized that the relationship I was risking wasn't the relationship I wanted to preserve anyway. The relationship where I was taken for granted, managed rather than included, and expected to provide financial support while accepting emotional dismissal wasn't worth protecting. David, what happens if they simply ignore the 30-day deadline? Then you follow through on the consequences you've outlined. You petition the bank to remove you as cosigner, which forces them to refinance or face default proceedings. And if they can't refinance, then they have to sell the house or find another cosigner. Rose, you need to be prepared for the possibility that calling their bluff might damage your relationship permanently. I spent the next few days thinking about David's warning. Was I prepared to risk my relationship with Marcus over what might appear to outsiders as a petty disagreement about Christmas dinner? But the more I reflected on the situation, the more I realized that the relationship I was risking wasn't the relationship I wanted to preserve anyway. The relationship where I was taken for granted, managed rather than included, and expected to provide financial support while accepting emotional dismissal wasn't worth protecting. On December 20th, exactly 1 week after my coffee shop meeting with Marcus, I received a text message from him that confirmed my worst suspicions about his character. Mom, Chelsea and I have been talking to our financial advisor. We think your demands about the mortgage are unrealistic and potentially harmful to our family's financial stability. We're hoping you'll reconsider your position and we can work together to find a more reasonable solution. I read the message 3 times, noting how he'd characterized my clearly stated boundaries as demands and my protection of my own financial interests as potentially harmful to his family. I called him immediately. Marcus, I got your text message. I want to make sure I understand your position correctly. Mom, look, we all want the same thing here. We want to maintain a good relationship while making smart financial decisions. Do we want the same thing? Because it seems like you want to maintain the financial advantages of our current arrangement while avoiding the family responsibilities that come with it. That's not fair. We're not avoiding family responsibilities. You excluded me from Christmas dinner because it was inconvenient to include me. How is that not avoiding responsibility? Marcus's response was immediate and revealing. Christmas dinner isn't a responsibility, Mom. It's a social event. We get to decide who comes to social events in our own house. His words hit me like a physical blow. After 32 years of being his mother, after 5 years of financial support that made his comfortable lifestyle possible, Christmas dinner with his family was a social event that I could be excluded from at their discretion. "You're absolutely right," I said quietly, "and I get to decide who benefits from my financial support." "Mom, don't be dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic, Marcus. I'm being practical. You've taught me that family relationships are transactional. You provide what you want to provide, and you receive what you want to receive. I'm simply applying that same logic to my own decisions." The conversation ended with Marcus accusing me of trying to punish him for making reasonable decisions about his own home, and me informing him that he had 10 days remaining to choose between refinancing and accepting my expectations about respectful treatment. That evening, I called Linda to update her on the situation. "Rose, I have to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. What is it? Are you prepared to lose Marcus over this? Because from what you're telling me, he's not going to choose the option you want him to choose." I'd been avoiding that question, but Linda's directness forced me to confront it. "Linda, I think I lost Marcus years ago. I just didn't realize it because I was so busy trying to be the mother he wanted that I stopped noticing he wasn't being the son I deserved." "What do you mean?" "I mean that the Marcus I raised, the boy I sacrificed everything for, would never have excluded me from Christmas dinner without a conversation. He would never have dismissed my feelings as unrealistic demands. The man I've been talking to this week isn't my son anymore. He's a stranger who happens to share my DNA and my financial support." Linda was quiet for a moment, processing what I'd said. "So what are you going to do?" "I'm going to follow through on exactly what I told him I would do. If he chooses to keep me as co-signer, he needs to treat me like family. If he chooses to exclude me from family events, then he can handle his financial obligations independently. And if he chooses independence, then I'll wish him well and focus on building relationships with people who actually value my presence in their lives." The next few days passed slowly, with December 21st marking the winter solstice and the shortest day of the year. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I was moving through the darkest period toward longer days and more light. On December 22nd, I received a call from an unexpected source. Emma, my 7-year-old granddaughter, had somehow gotten hold of Chelsea's phone and called me directly. "Nana Rose, why aren't you coming for Christmas?" Her small voice broke something inside me that I'd been trying to keep protected throughout this entire ordeal. "Hi, sweetheart. Did Mommy and Daddy tell you I wasn't coming? They said you were sick or busy or something, but I wanted to show you the drawing I made of us baking cookies together." Emma had no idea that she was at the center of a family crisis. In her mind, Christmas meant having all the people she loved gathered together, and my absence would be a disappointment she didn't understand. "Emma, honey, can you put Mommy on the phone?" "She's in the shower. Daddy's wrapping presents in the basement. I'm supposed to be napping, but I wanted to call you." My heart ached listening to her innocent voice, knowing that my decision to stand up for myself might mean missing years of moments like this. "Nana Rose, are you mad at us?" "Oh, sweetheart, I'm not mad at you at all. I love you so much." "Then why can't you come for Christmas?" Before I could answer, I heard Chelsea's voice in the background, sharp and concerned. "Emma, what are you doing with my phone?" The line went quiet, and then Chelsea was speaking to me with barely controlled anger. "Rose, you cannot call here and upset Emma with this adult drama." "I didn't call there. Emma called me." "Well, you shouldn't have taken the call. She doesn't understand what's happening, and now she's asking questions we don't know how to answer." "Tell her the truth, Chelsea. Tell her that you decided not to invite me for Christmas because it was more convenient to exclude me." "Rose, that's not what happened, and you know it." "That's exactly what happened. The only question now is whether you're going to acknowledge it honestly or continue pretending that this is about space limitations and complicated logistics." Chelsea hung up on me, but not before I heard Emma in the background asking why Nana Rose sounded sad. That night, I barely slept. The conversation with Emma had reminded me that my conflict with Marcus and Chelsea would have consequences beyond our immediate relationship. I would miss Emma's childhood, miss the opportunity to be the kind of grandmother I'd always hoped to be. But I would also miss the opportunity to teach Emma that accepting disrespectful treatment was normal and expected. I would miss the chance to show her that adults could have healthy boundaries and mutual consideration in their relationships. Maybe my absence from her life would be a loss, but maybe my presence as someone who accepted being devalued and dismissed would be a worse influence. On December 23rd, with 1 week remaining before Marcus's deadline, I received a call from someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. Marcus's father, Robert, was calling from Phoenix, where he'd been living since our divorce when Marcus was 3. "Rose, Marcus called me yesterday. He's upset about some situation with you and Christmas and a mortgage. He asked me to talk to you." I was so surprised to hear from Robert that I didn't immediately respond. In 30 years since our divorce, he'd had minimal contact with Marcus and virtually no contact with me. "Robert, I'm surprised Marcus reached out to you about this." "Yeah, well, he seems to think I might have some influence with you. I told him I doubted that, but he was pretty insistent." Robert's voice was the same as I remembered, casual and slightly amused, as if everything was a minor inconvenience that would sort itself out eventually. "What did he tell you?" "He said you're threatening to mess up his mortgage because he didn't invite you for Christmas dinner. That sounds pretty extreme, even for you." Even for me? Robert's casual dismissal of my position, combined with his assumption that I was being unreasonable, triggered a fury I hadn't expected. "Robert, you've been absent from Marcus's life for 29 years. You've contributed nothing to his upbringing, his education, or his success. What makes you think you have any understanding of this situation?" "Hey, calm down. I'm just trying to help." "Help who? The son you abandoned, or the ex-wife you've ignored for 3 decades?" Robert was quiet for a moment, probably taken aback by my directness. In our marriage and divorce, I'd been accommodating and non-confrontational, focused on minimizing conflict for Marcus's sake. "Look, Rose, I don't know all the details, but it seems like you're making a big deal out of something that could be worked out with a little compromise." Compromise? That's interesting advice from someone who compromised himself right out of his son's life. That's not fair. Neither is asking me to enable Marcus's financial security while accepting his emotional dismissal. But I guess you wouldn't understand that, since you've never supported him financially or emotionally. The conversation ended with Robert saying he'd done what Marcus asked, and it was up to me to decide whether I wanted to be reasonable or not. After hanging up, I realized that Marcus had been working behind the scenes to find allies who might pressure me to back down from my position. First, Chelsea had tried to negotiate with me directly. Then, Marcus had attempted to minimize my concerns, and now he'd enlisted his absent father to suggest I was being unreasonable. None of these approaches addressed the fundamental issue, which was that Marcus felt entitled to my financial support while feeling no obligation to include me respectfully in his family life. The next morning, Christmas Eve, I woke up to find 3 voicemail messages on my phone. The first was from Marcus, asking me to call him back because he wanted to discuss a new proposal. The second was from Chelsea, apologizing for hanging up on me and asking if we could start over with a fresh conversation. The third message was from Emma. "Nana Rose, I miss you. Mommy said you might come for Christmas Eve if I called and asked nicely. Please come. I made you a present." I sat at my kitchen table listening to Emma's sweet voice and felt the full weight of the choice I was making. This wasn't just about my relationship with Marcus and Chelsea anymore. This was about my relationship with my granddaughter and the kind of person I wanted to be in her life. But it was also about the kind of example I wanted to set for her about self-respect and healthy relationships. I called Marcus back first. "Mom, thank you for calling. I know yesterday was tense, but Chelsea and I have been talking, and we think we found a solution that works for everyone." "I'm listening." "What if you came for Christmas Eve dinner, stayed overnight, and had Christmas morning with us and the kids? Chelsea's parents would still have their special time, but you'd be part of the celebration too." I closed my eyes, feeling the temptation to accept this compromise. It would be so easy to say yes, to prioritize my relationship with Emma over my concerns about being treated respectfully by her parents. Marcus, that's a generous offer, but it doesn't address the issue that prompted my ultimatum. What do you mean? I mean that you're offering me a compromise about Christmas scheduling, but you haven't acknowledged that excluding me in the first place was disrespectful and hurtful. Mom, we weren't trying to be disrespectful, we were just trying to manage a complicated situation. By making decisions about my inclusion in family events without discussing it with me first? Marcus was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the frustration in his breathing. What do you want me to say? That we should have handled it differently? I want you to understand that my financial support of your lifestyle comes with expectations about how I'm treated as a family member. If you can't meet those expectations, then we should end the financial relationship. But we're offering to include you now. You're offering to include me because I threatened to withdraw my financial support. That's not respect, Marcus. That's negotiation under duress.
The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Marcus becoming increasingly frustrated as he realized that his Christmas Eve invitation wouldn't resolve the larger issue between us. "Mom, I don't understand what you want from us. We're trying to make this work. I want you to treat me like someone whose feelings and presence matter to you, not like someone who needs to be managed and accommodated when it's convenient. But we do value you. Then why didn't you value me enough to discuss the Christmas situation with me before making a decision? Why didn't you consider my feelings before excluding me?" Marcus had no answer for that question, which told me everything I needed to know about his real attitude toward my role in his life. I called Chelsea next, expecting another attempt at negotiation or compromise. Instead, her tone was cold and businesslike. "Rose, I want you to know that we've consulted with our attorney about your demands regarding the mortgage." "And what did your attorney tell you?" "He told us that your threats might constitute financial abuse and that there are legal remedies available if you try to use the mortgage as a weapon against us." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December weather outside my apartment. Chelsea was escalating our family conflict into legal territory, characterizing my boundary setting as abuse and my self-protection as weaponization. "Chelsea, I've offered Marcus a clear choice between two reasonable options. How is that abuse? You're using financial leverage to force us to include you in family events against our will. That's coercion." "Against your will? Is including me in your family really such a burden?" "That's not the point. The point is that you don't get to dictate terms of family relationships by threatening our financial security." Her words crystallized the fundamental disagreement between us. Chelsea saw my expectations of respectful treatment as dictating terms, while I saw their financial dependence on me as creating mutual obligations. "Chelsea, let me ask you a question. If I wasn't co-signing your mortgage, would you have excluded me from Christmas dinner?" She was quiet for a moment, probably recognizing the trap in my question. "Our Christmas planning decisions aren't related to financial arrangements." "That's not what I asked. I asked whether you would have excluded me if you didn't need my financial support." "Rose, I think this conversation has gone far enough. We'll be making our decision about the mortgage situation based on what's best for our family, not based on emotional manipulation." After Chelsea hung up on me for the second time in 3 days, I sat in my apartment thinking about how quickly our family disagreement had devolved into accusations of abuse and manipulation. I was being characterized as the aggressor in a situation where I was simply refusing to continue accepting disrespectful treatment. My attempts to set boundaries were being framed as threats, and my expectations of mutual consideration were being dismissed as unreasonable demands. The irony was that Marcus and Chelsea's response to my boundary setting proved exactly why those boundaries were necessary. Instead of acknowledging that they'd treated me poorly and committing to do better, they'd chosen to attack my character and threaten legal action. That evening, Christmas Eve, I received one final call from Marcus. "Mom, this is your last chance to be reasonable about this situation. We're willing to include you in our Christmas celebration if you drop this mortgage ultimatum." His tone was ultimatum-like, as if he was the one with leverage in our relationship. "Marcus, you have 6 days left to make your decision about refinancing. I'm not changing the terms I've offered you."
Then you're choosing money over family? His accusation stung, but I'd been expecting it. People who take advantage of others' generosity often accuse those others of being money-focused when the generosity ends. No, Marcus. I'm choosing self-respect over being taken for granted. You're the one who's choosing financial convenience over family relationships. We'll see about that. The line went dead, and I realized that Marcus had moved past negotiation into something that felt like retaliation. I spent Christmas Eve alone in my apartment, but not unhappily. I'd made a clear decision about what I was and wasn't willing to accept from my family, and I was prepared to live with the consequences of that decision. On Christmas morning, I woke up to find a small gift on my doorstep. Inside the package was a drawing from Emma, showing the two of us baking cookies together, with a note in her careful 7-year-old handwriting. "I love you, Nana Rose. Merry Christmas." I cried reading that note, knowing that my decision to stand up for myself might cost me the relationship with Emma that I treasured most of all. But I also knew that accepting disrespectful treatment from her parents would teach her that love meant tolerating behavior that diminished her worth. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their worst impulses, even when that refusal comes at a personal cost. I spent Christmas Day reading, taking a long walk in the snow, and preparing for whatever decision Marcus would make about our ultimatum. I felt sad about missing Christmas with Emma, but I also felt something I hadn't experienced in years: pride in my own courage to demand better treatment. On December 27th, I received a certified letter from Marcus and Chelsea's attorney. The letter informed me that they were disputing my right to demand removal as cosigner, and that any attempts to interfere with their mortgage would be met with legal action. I forwarded the letter to David Kowalski and scheduled a meeting for the next morning. "Rose, they're trying to intimidate you into backing down," David explained after reviewing their attorney's letter, "but their legal position is weak. As cosigner, you have clear rights that can't be disputed just because they don't like the consequences of exercising those rights. What happens now? Now we follow through on exactly what we told them we would do. They've made their choice, and we respect that choice by implementing the consequences we clearly outlined." On December 28th, David filed the paperwork to begin the process of removing me as cosigner on Marcus's mortgage. The bank would now require Marcus and Chelsea to qualify for the loan independently or face default proceedings. I felt a mixture of sadness and relief as David explained the timeline. Within 60 days, Marcus would need to demonstrate that he could handle the mortgage payments without my guarantee, or the bank would initiate foreclosure procedures. "Are you sure about this, Rose? There's still time to change your mind." I thought about Emma's drawing, about the Christmases I would miss, about the relationship with my son that might never recover from this decision. But I also thought about the 30 years I'd spent putting Marcus's needs ahead of my own, and the 5 years I'd spent providing financial support while being gradually excluded from the family life I'd helped make possible. "I'm sure, David. It's time Marcus learned that my generosity comes with expectations of mutual respect." As we left David's office that afternoon, I realized that I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. Whatever happens next, my relationship with Marcus would never return to the comfortable pattern of my endless giving and his casual taking. For the first time in my adult life, I was prioritizing my own worth over someone else's convenience. It felt terrifying and liberating at the same time. January passed in a strange calm that I hadn't expected. The legal wheels were turning, paperwork was being processed, and Marcus and Chelsea were scrambling to secure alternative financing for their mortgage. But for me, life had taken on a peaceful routine that I'd forgotten was possible. I wasn't checking my phone constantly for updates from Marcus. I wasn't worrying about family dynamics or trying to navigate the complex emotional landscape of being included but not valued. Instead, I was rediscovering what it felt like to make decisions based solely on what I wanted to do rather than what was expected of me. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, had invited me to join her weekly book club, something I'd been too busy to consider when I was constantly managing Marcus's needs and emotions. The group met every Thursday evening at the local library, discussing everything from contemporary fiction to historical biographies. The first meeting I attended was awkward, since I'd missed months of previous discussions and felt like an outsider joining an established group. But the women were welcoming. And I discovered that I had opinions about books that I'd never had the confidence to express when my social time was limited to family gatherings where my role was supportive rather than participatory. Rose, what did you think of the author's treatment of intergenerational conflict? Asked Janet, the group's unofficial leader, during our discussion of a novel about family estrangement. I found myself speaking with a clarity I hadn't expected about the ways adult children sometimes weaponize emotional guilt to maintain financial advantages from their parents. The other women listened with interest, several of them sharing their own experiences with family members who expected ongoing support while providing minimal emotional reciprocity. It's fascinating how we convince ourselves that setting boundaries with family members is selfish, observed Margaret, a retired teacher whose own daughter had been expecting free childcare while refusing to include Margaret in family vacation planning. We'd never accept that kind of treatment from friends or colleagues, but somehow family relationships are supposed to operate by different rules. These conversations were revealing to me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I'd spent so many years focused on being a good mother that I'd never considered whether Marcus was being a good son. I'd assumed that any problems in our relationship were failures on my part to be understanding or accommodating enough. But listening to other women describe similar dynamics with their adult children, I began to recognize patterns that extended beyond my specific situation. The expectation that parents would provide ongoing financial and emotional support while accepting whatever level of inclusion or consideration their children felt like providing wasn't unique to my family. It was a cultural pattern that many of us had internalized without questioning whether it actually served anyone well. February brought news from David Kowalski about the mortgage situation. Marcus and Chelsea had been denied for independent refinancing twice, apparently because their debt-to-income ratio was higher than I'd realized when they'd first applied for cosigner removal. It seems they've been using the equity in their house to secure additional loans, David explained during our monthly check-in. Home equity line of credit, a boat loan, and what appears to be consolidation of credit card debt. Without your co-signature backing their primary mortgage, the banks are reluctant to take on the additional risk. I felt a complicated mixture of vindication and sadness hearing this information. Vindication because it confirmed that my financial support had been more significant than Marcus had acknowledged. Sadness because it meant that their comfortable lifestyle had been built on a foundation of debt that I'd been unknowingly subsidizing. What happens if they can't qualify for refinancing by the deadline? Then the bank initiates foreclosure proceedings, and they'll need to sell the house to satisfy the mortgage debt. The thought of Emma losing her home because of my decision to protect my financial interests was painful, but I reminded myself that Emma was losing her home because her parents had made financial decisions based on the assumption that my support would continue indefinitely regardless of how they treated me. I'd given Marcus and Chelsea clear options: treat me with respect and keep the financial arrangement, or pursue financial independence and make their own choices about family inclusion. They'd chosen a third option: keep the financial benefits while refusing to acknowledge any corresponding obligations. That choice had consequences, and those consequences weren't my responsibility to manage. In March, I received an unexpected call from Emma's school. Apparently, Chelsea had listed me as an emergency contact, and Emma had been sick during a day when both her parents were unavailable due to work obligations. "Mrs. Thompson, Emma has a fever and needs to be picked up from school. We've been trying to reach her parents for over an hour, but haven't been able to get through." I found myself in the strange position of being considered family enough to handle emergency childcare, but not family enough to be included in holiday celebrations. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I also couldn't ignore a sick child who needed help. When I arrived at the school, Emma ran to me with the uncomplicated joy that only children can express. She was pale and clearly unwell, but her face lit up when she saw me in the school office. "Nana Rose, I missed you so much. Mommy said you were traveling and couldn't visit us anymore." I took Emma back to my apartment and spent the afternoon caring for her while trying to reach Marcus or Chelsea to let them know where she was. Neither of them answered their phones until almost 5 o'clock, when Chelsea finally called back in a panic. "Rose, where is Emma? The school said someone picked her up, but they wouldn't tell me who." "She's with me. She had a fever and needed to be picked up. The school couldn't reach either of you." Chelsea's relief was audible. "Oh, thank God! I was in a client meeting all afternoon with my phone off, and Marcus is at some conference in Chicago. I'll come get her right away." "She's sleeping right now and her fever has come down. Maybe it's better to let her rest here until Marcus gets back tonight?" "Rose, I appreciate you helping out, but I'd prefer to have her at home." Even in this situation, where I'd provided emergency childcare for their daughter, Chelsea maintained the careful distance that characterized our relationship now. I was useful when they needed me, but I wasn't someone they wanted to depend on or include more broadly in their lives. When Chelsea arrived to pick up Emma, our interaction was polite but strained. She thanked me for helping out, but made it clear that this was an exceptional circumstance rather than a return to normal family relationships. "Emma, say thank you to Nana Rose for taking care of you today." Emma hugged me tightly, whispering in my ear that she'd missed me and asking when I could come visit her at home again. "Maybe soon, sweetheart," I said, knowing that the likelihood of such visits depended entirely on whether Marcus and Chelsea resolved their mortgage situation in a way that allowed them to maintain their current lifestyle and home. After they left, I sat in my quiet apartment thinking about the strangeness of the situation. In one afternoon, I'd been reminded of how much I loved Emma and how much I enjoyed being part of her life. But I'd also been reminded of how conditional my access to her had become, based entirely on her parents' convenience and immediate needs. April brought warmer weather and news from David that Marcus and Chelsea had found a potential solution to their mortgage problem. Chelsea's parents in Phoenix had apparently agreed to be co-signers on a refinanced loan, allowing Marcus and Chelsea to remove me from their financial obligations. "They'll be able to keep the house," David explained, "but their monthly payments will increase significantly, and they'll have new co-signers who might have different expectations about family relationships." I felt a complex mixture of emotions hearing this news. Relief that Emma wouldn't lose her home, sadness that my relationship with Marcus had deteriorated to the point where he preferred to involve his in-laws in his financial affairs rather than maintain respectful relationships with me, and curiosity about whether Chelsea's parents understood what they were signing up for in terms of ongoing financial liability. Does this resolve everything from a legal standpoint? Once the refinancing is complete and your name is removed from all the loan documents, you'll have no further financial obligations related to their property. You'll also have no further legal standing to influence their financial decisions. The finality of David's words was both liberating and melancholy. After 5 years of financial entanglement that had given me a stake in Marcus's stability and success, I would be completely separate from his economic situation. I would also be free to make decisions about my own financial future without considering the impact on his mortgage payments, his lifestyle, or his family security. On May 15th, I received a formal notification that the refinancing had been completed and my co-signer obligations had been terminated. Marcus and Chelsea now owed their mortgage debt to Chelsea's parents, and I was no longer legally or financially connected to their homeownership. I expected to feel relieved, and I did. But I also felt something I hadn't anticipated: grief for the relationship I'd thought I had with my son, and acceptance that the relationship I actually had was never worth the sacrifices I'd made to maintain it. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since before Marcus was born. I made a list of everything I wanted to do with the rest of my life without considering anyone else's needs, expectations, or approval. I wanted to travel to places I'd always been curious about but never had time or money to visit because I was supporting Marcus's goals and lifestyle. I wanted to take art classes and learn to paint landscapes. I wanted to volunteer for causes that mattered to me rather than causes that made me look like a supportive mother and grandmother. I wanted to date again, something I'd avoided for years because I'd convinced myself that my primary relationship should be with my family. I wanted to explore friendships with people who chose to spend time with me because they enjoyed my company, not because they were obligated by blood relationships or financial dependencies. Most importantly, I wanted to stop making decisions based on guilt, obligation, or the fear of disappointing people who had already chosen to exclude me from their lives whenever it was convenient for them. The next morning, I called a travel agent and booked a 2-week trip to Ireland for July. I'd always been fascinated by Irish literature and music, but I'd never allowed myself to spend money on such an indulgent personal interest when Marcus might need financial help with something practical.
Now, Marcus's financial needs were his responsibility and his in-laws' concern. My money was mine to spend on experiences that would enrich my own life rather than subsidize someone else's comfort. In June, I received an unexpected phone call from Marcus. His tone was different from our previous conversations, less defensive and more uncertain.
Mom, I wanted to let you know that Emma's been asking about you a lot lately. She wants to know when she can see you again. What have you been telling her? That you've been busy with your own life, and that grown-ups sometimes need time to work out their differences. I appreciated that he wasn't trying to make me the villain in Emma's mind, but I also noticed that he wasn't taking responsibility for the choices that had created our estrangement. Marcus, Emma is welcome in my life anytime you think it's appropriate, but that's a decision you and Chelsea need to make based on what kind of relationship you want us to have going forward. What do you mean? I mean that I'm not going to pretend that nothing happened between us. I'm not going to go back to accepting whatever level of inclusion you feel like offering while pretending that my feelings don't matter. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Mom, I've been thinking about some of the things you said last winter, about respect and family relationships. And what have you concluded? I think maybe we handled the Christmas situation poorly. Chelsea and I were focused on managing logistics, and we didn't really consider how our decision would affect you. It wasn't a complete apology, but it was the closest Marcus had come to acknowledging that they'd treated me badly. I appreciate you saying that. I was wondering if we could start over somehow. Maybe have dinner together, just you and me, and talk about how to move forward. What do you mean? I mean that I'm not going to pretend that nothing happened between us. I'm not going to go back to accepting whatever level of inclusion you feel like offering while pretending that my feelings don't matter. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Mom, I've been thinking about some of the things you said last winter, about respect and family relationships. And what have you concluded? I think maybe we handled the Christmas situation poorly. Chelsea and I were focused on managing logistics, and we didn't really consider how our decision would affect you. It wasn't a complete apology, but it was the closest Marcus had come to acknowledging that they'd treated me badly. I appreciate you saying that. I was wondering if we could start over somehow. Maybe have dinner together, just you and me, and talk about how to move forward. I found myself considering his offer seriously. The financial leverage that had forced this conversation was gone, but maybe that was actually better. Maybe we could build a relationship based on mutual choice rather than obligation or dependency. I'd be willing to have dinner with you, Marcus, as long as you understand that I'm not the same person I was 6 months ago. What do you mean? I mean that I've learned to prioritize my own needs and feelings. I'm not going to go back to being someone who accepts whatever treatment you feel like giving just because I'm afraid of losing my relationship with you and Emma. We agreed to meet for dinner the following week, with no expectations beyond honest conversation about whether we could build a healthier relationship going forward. The dinner was awkward at first, both of us uncertain about how to interact without the financial dynamics that had defined our relationship for the past 5 years. But gradually, we began talking about things we hadn't discussed in years. Marcus told me about the stress of managing increased mortgage payments and the complexity of having Chelsea's parents involved in their financial decisions. He described feeling caught between his wife's expectations and his growing recognition that he'd treated me unfairly. I told him about my book club, my travel plans, and my discovery that I had interests and opinions that I'd suppressed for decades while focusing on being supportive rather than authentic. Mom, I didn't realize how much of yourself you'd been giving up to help me succeed. I don't think I realized it either until I stopped doing it. We talked for over 3 hours, longer than we'd talked in years, not about logistics or obligations or family management, but about who we were as individuals and what we wanted from our relationship with each other. By the end of the evening, we'd established some basic agreements. Marcus would discuss major family decisions with me before implementing them, especially decisions that affect my inclusion in family events. I would communicate directly about my needs and expectations rather than assuming he should automatically know what they were. Most importantly, we both agreed that our relationship should be based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than financial dependency or obligated contact. What about Emma? I asked as we prepared to leave the restaurant. Emma misses you terribly. Chelsea and I would like you to be part of her life, but we understand that needs to happen in a way that works for everyone. 3 weeks later, I had dinner at Marcus and Chelsea's house for the first time since the previous Christmas. The evening was tentative and careful, with all of us trying to navigate new boundaries and expectations. But Emma's joy at having me back in her life reminded me why family relationships, when they're healthy and mutual, are worth fighting for. Chelsea apologized directly for how she'd handled the Christmas situation, acknowledging that they'd made decisions based on convenience rather than consideration for my feelings. She also thanked me for taking care of Emma during the school emergency, recognizing that I'd helped them even after they'd excluded me from their family celebration. Rose, I want you to know that I've learned something important from this whole experience. I've been so focused on managing our immediate household that I forgot to consider the people who've supported us along the way. It wasn't a complete transformation of our relationship, but it was a foundation for building something more honest and respectful than what we'd had before. I spent the summer traveling to Ireland, taking art classes, and exploring volunteer opportunities with literacy programs in my community. I also began dating a retired professor named William, who shared my love of reading and had his own stories about learning to set boundaries with adult children. When I returned from Ireland in August, I found that my relationship with Marcus and his family had continued to evolve in positive directions. They'd included me in Emma's birthday party planning, asking for my input rather than simply informing me of their decisions. Chelsea had started calling me occasionally just to chat, rather than only contacting me when they needed something. Most importantly, Emma and I were building a relationship based on genuine connection rather than my desperate need to remain relevant in her life. We spent Saturday afternoons together exploring museums, baking cookies, and reading stories, activities chosen because we both enjoyed them rather than because I was providing free childcare. The October evening when Marcus called to invite me for Thanksgiving dinner, the invitation came with a question rather than an assumption. "Mom, would you like to join us for Thanksgiving this year? We're planning to have it at our house, and we'd love for you to be part of it if you're interested." "I'd like that very much," I said, noting how different this felt from the previous year's expectation that I would automatically be included without any consideration of my preferences or needs. Thanksgiving dinner was warm and comfortable in ways that family gatherings hadn't been in years. Conversation flowed naturally, including everyone present rather than focusing on managing different people's expectations or avoiding potential conflicts. When Chelsea's parents visited for Christmas that year, I was included in the celebration as a valued family member rather than someone who needed to be accommodated. The difference was subtle but significant, reflecting the broader changes in how we all approached family relationships. By the following spring, a full year after our crisis over Christmas dinner and mortgage obligations, I realized that the conflict that had seemed so destructive at the time had actually created the foundation for healthier relationships with everyone involved. Marcus had learned that my support and presence in his life weren't entitlements, but gifts that required nurturing and reciprocation. Chelsea had discovered that including me in their family didn't diminish her own role, but actually strengthened their support system. Emma had a grandmother who was present by choice rather than obligation, which made our time together more genuine and joyful. And I had learned the most important lesson of all, that loving someone doesn't require accepting poor treatment from them, and that setting boundaries with family members can actually improve relationships rather than destroying them. The mortgage crisis that had seemed like such a dramatic confrontation was really just the catalyst for conversations we should have been having all along about respect, expectations, and mutual consideration in family relationships. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their worst behaviors, even when that refusal comes at personal cost. And sometimes, the relationships that survive that kind of honesty become stronger and more authentic than they ever were when they were based on obligation and assumption. As I sat in my apartment on a quiet Sunday morning in May, reading a book about Irish history and planning my next trip to Scotland, I reflected on how much my life had changed since that December phone call when Marcus had told me I wasn't expected for Christmas. I'd lost the version of my son who took my support for granted while excluding me from his life when it was convenient. But I'd gained a relationship with a man who had learned to value what I brought to his family and to communicate openly about expectations and boundaries. The relationship I had with Marcus and his family now wasn't the same as what we'd had before our crisis.
But it was better. It was based on mutual choice rather than financial dependency, on respect rather than obligation, and on genuine affection rather than assumed devotion. And perhaps most importantly, it was a relationship where I could be authentically myself, rather than constantly adapting to whatever version of me seemed most convenient for others. That, I'd learned, was worth fighting for. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.